We finally got through the rock, started getting all the stuff. And then you have weather because you got delayed with permitting a few different times back in the summer. So we didn't start with excavation till August. Then we hit the rock, and then it started raining. We got snow and all the stuff. We're probably 4 months behind where we really wanted to be. Other developers try to encourage me that unless you're a year behind, you're not really behind. But it feels behind.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast, the podcast dedicated to simplifying the commercial real estate industry for the masses. Each week, we sit down with industry experts to dissect the many facets of commercial real estate and extract valuable lessons you can apply to your business. Whether you're a new or seasoned business owner or investor, the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast will be your go-to resource for all your commercial real estate needs. Now, here are your hosts, Raphael Collazo and Jeff Walston.
Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Academy podcast. I'm your host, Raphael Collazo, here with my co-host, Jeff Walston. How's it going, my friend?
Going great. Like I always say, business is good, but don't know what's around the corner. So going to keep trucking along with that. But I'm kind of excited about the guest today. But what about you, Raphael? How's it going over there?
Yeah, same. I'm excited about the guest as well. And, as in brokerage, you're always having to fill your pipeline because you never know what's going to happen. I've had a deal actually just fall apart, unfortunately, but, that's the name of the game. Just got to get back on the horse and, keep riding. And, today's guest actually is an awesome individual. You know him well. And I've just met him actually very recently at a CCIM event. But we've been back and forth on text and calls before. So I feel like I already know him, but I'm looking forward to kind of learn a little bit more about Jay Ingram. Who's an agent with Alton Webb in Shelbyville, actually, Kentucky. So we're excited to have you, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, we kind of gave a brief introduction on who you were, but we'd like to learn a little bit more about you on a personal level and obviously how you, evolving into the real estate space. So if you could kind of share a little bit about your backstory, I think that'd be great.
Yeah. So I grew up in the middle of a cow pasture in North Alabama. So that's not an exaggeration. I could have pegged a cow with a rock in 3 different directions. And going with that, my great granddad bought that farm in the middle of the Depression with no idea how he's going to pay for it. So I guess property acquisition's a little bit in the blood there and risk taking. But grew up in Northeast Alabama, went to Auburn University for college, spent a few years after that in Asia. My master's in undergrad is in history and teaching English as a second language. And I did that for 10 years. I joke with people that I used to be fluent in Chinese, but Shelbyville, I don't get a lot of practice. And basically came to Louisville, met my wife. She was at U of L med school at the time. She's an ear, nose, and throat doctor here locally with advanced ENT. And when we moved back to Kentucky after residency, we were trying to just figure out what to do. We got super heavily involved in a church in Louisville called Emmanuel Baptist Church and ended up moving to Shelbyville 5 years ago and being part of a church plant. And actually, Jeff is working on building out our new space. So that's a cool link. I met Jeff a few years ago. He's done several jobs for different clients here in Shelby County. And now he's actually building out our church. But kind of got into investment real estate at first. I think everybody has a multitude of reasons that they got into real estate. For us, one was I've always been interested in real estate. Second was I love vision, and I could just see in buildings and in property what they could potentially be. So it kind of fed into that. I'm a natural vision caster. And then investment, real estate is obviously a great investment tool. And all those things kind of came together. 5 years ago, I started working with Lee Webb, who's the broker at Alton Webb. He and his dad started the business back in 98. And like I said, at first I was kind of on the investment side. And then I got into development. He and his dad developed numerous projects over the last 25 years. And I'm currently in the middle of a project called Saddlebred Point, which is 80-ish acres of commercial property in Shelbyville. Like I said, that was not in the 5-year plan. It's just the Lord works in mysterious ways.
Yeah, we're excited to kind of dive into that a little bit later regarding your Saddle Point project, because you're right. I mean, it is a pretty expansive project you have out in Shelbyville, and it's going to be really cool once you guys, get the different phases done of the project. And you'd mentioned your involvement in the cow pastures in Alabama. I grew up. I was a military brat, and I traveled all over Europe and lived in a small town in Belgium, and I was surrounded by cow pastures as well. And we used to kick the ball. We used to play soccer in my backyard and kick the ball like over the hedges in our backyard, and I'd have to go dive under like the bull fence to get the ball. And several times I got stung with it. So
Oh man, one of the things people around here, when they talk about like getting cows or something, people will move here from California or Colorado or Chicago and be like, "Oh, I'm thinking about buying some cows." I'm like, listen, they only get out when it's raining and dark. They never get out of the pasture at 2 o'clock on a beautiful day. And I've spent many a night chasing cows back in the fence out in the middle of the road, getting cussed out by somebody.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I know that when you said the real estate investments, I know that you kind of dabbled in residential and commercial. What kind of drew you away from residential and like more into the commercial sector?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as far as the investment side, I like the longer term leases for one. So you can kind of forecast your income for longer. With some of the laws that were passed in 2016, you could get really good depreciation. This is kind of in the weeds, but the depreciation schedule for a residential property is 27 and a half years. This commercial is 39, but because of cost segregations and kind of accelerating your depreciation, that was a big benefit the last few years. And so I would say the stability of the tenant, the length of lease, and kind of being able to project the value long term is what drew me into commercial. I still have 4 residential properties with a partner of mine. So, I've not sold all those rental houses or anything like that. Sold a few, but not all of them.
I just know I've looked at several of Jay's residential properties before, and they keep a pretty tight ship and nice properties, and even the commercial as well. It's amazing. I want to commend you on that on the property management side too. I know you haven't touched on that, but it's I know it's a lot to handle with all the other duties you have, but it's you're doing a great job with that. So,
well, I appreciate it, but we have made some mistakes, and we had one property in particular that got kind of under our chest and into our hearts as far as the stress level. A small multifamily deal that we had when COVID started. It was like, well, are people going to pay rent? Are we going to get any money out of this? So just like everybody else, I think when COVID started, you were like, there's a big question mark here. I'm not sure what's going to happen.
It's part of it's a matter of when, not if, right? So, I have a small multifamily in Old Louisville, and I've, had pretty solid tenants over the course of my time there. And, I just recently had to unfortunately evict someone, which is not fun, but, it's part of the business. And, luckily we were able to do it such that, they had vacated before, I had to go through that final eviction process. So they didn't have it on their record. But again, it's one of those things where it's not fun, but you gotta, it's part of the investment journey. So, but what I'm kind of curious about is, obviously you got into the brokerage space after having your previous career. And that seems to be very typical on a lot of different brokers that I've talked to. Some come out straight out of college, and that's kind of all they've ever done. And like you, I had a previous career before I got into commercial real estate brokerage. And so, can you kind of talk about, your decision for wanting to go that route? And then number 2, maybe talk about some of the early struggles you faced, because it is a very, unique career choice. And, it's one that, the first couple of years in particular are typically pretty challenging. So,
so when I really took the leap into investment, I had thought for a while that I wanted to be a college professor, and I had started adjuncting, which means basically you teach 1 or 2 classes on the college level. So I started doing that. I was teaching linguistics and applied linguistics, which is basically like, because this is the way language works, how you teach. Loved it. And I was working on a doctorate at Indiana University. We had just had our 3rd baby. My wife works, and I was also a non-staff pastor at our church in Louisville. And I was like, okay, something's got to give. And so I was like, about that same time, I started investigating more about university. I love teaching and I love helping students. The thing that I didn't want to do is publish. So most college professors, it's publish or die is the mantra. So if you're not continually cranking out books, research articles, you're probably not going to hang around for long. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is in American university. So as I was kind of doing that soul searching, sounds pretty basic for a lot of investors, but my sister-in-law had given me a copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad on Audible. She gifted me that book, and I would listen to it as I commuted, and it was like a light bulb went off. And I was like, oh, assets and liabilities. I come from a very blue collar background. The only financial advice my dad ever gave me was don't invest in the stock market. You'll lose all your money. I was like, well, what do I do? And is that so?
Yeah. You got a pillowcase. Just, put it in there.
Yeah. Right. So, he worked in a factory for 30 years with Goodyear, and he's got a pension, and, that worked out for him, but not so much for me. And, so yeah, I just went through like, what is an asset? What's a liability? Like base one. And then I realized that, the path that I was going on was A, not sustainable with everything we had going. B, was not really what I wanted to do. So about that time, we started planning to move to Shelbyville. My wife grew up in Shelbyville. She'd say that too. I started meeting with Lee Webb, my current broker, because we were looking for a new space for my wife to go into. Her former building was old, and my in-laws and Lee's parents had been really close friends before his dad passed away. And so I started meeting with Lee, talking to him about space. And then, long story short, his wife is the trustee at UK, and about half of his business was in the Lexington area anyway. So he decided that they're going to relocate to Nicholasville. And he was like, well, we've been talking a lot about real estate. You've already got into investment. I've been in, investment business for about 3 years at that point. He said, I need somebody that I can trust to take over this office. I will give you no formal training, but I have a cell phone and the front seat of my truck. And so a month later, I have my license, and I'm riding in the front seat of his truck and calling him when I have questions. And that's kind of how I got into it. Was just he saw that I, obviously I've worked on a doctorate. I'm not trying to be boastful, but I know how to learn. I've been teaching people different learning strategies for years. I know how to learn things. And so he saw that I could learn the business. Still a long way to go. Obviously, you're never going to learn 100% of any business, but that's kind of how I got into it. Was just he saw that there was potential there. I'm not afraid to talk to people. I've lived abroad, and had to learn another language to get around. And if you can't make a language mistake and have people laugh at you at the market, then you're not going to learn another language. So, there was already some assertiveness and some blocks that he could build on there. And I mean, he's been a phenomenal mentor to me. I can't speak highly enough about Lee. I was able to go into Shelbyville and establish a lot of relationships very quickly because he's a man of integrity, and I was riding on his coattails. So, if I told people, oh, I work with Lee Webb around here, they would automatically be like, oh, okay, well, you may or may not know what you're doing, but I know I can trust you. You're not going to lie to me. Mm-hmm. And so, to have that reputation already was really, really valuable.
I could speak highly of, your whole team in that office there. If you go around town in Shelbyville in Kentucky here, and if you asked about that office, that just there's nothing but praise that comes from the people around in the county and several counties around that as well. So yeah, I can second that that notion for sure.
Yeah, and I like to. I'll go ahead, Jay. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, I just said that means a lot. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I'd like to extract a bit on that too, because, you'd mentioned your, somewhat, I mean, again, when you relocate to a place that no one, you don't, I mean,
Mhm.
you may have known a little bit about the language, but you really don't know the language until you live there and
Right.
really get in the midst of everything. And especially, I mean, I'm assuming you were living in China. Is that where you were living?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the
So,
not so glamorous part.
well, and that's but even then, like I had the opportunity to go to Beijing for a few days,
Mhm.
several years ago, and it is a different environment. It's just like a completely different cultural shock. That's the first time I've ever felt culture shock, where I was walking
Mhm.
around and I was just like, man, like I mean, no one really spoke the English, and in most parts of Western Europe, if you travel around, you can get by with just the English you have, but in East Asia, it's a different animal. And so, having
Mhm.
that experience where you're dropped into a place and forced to kind of manage your relationships with what's going on, that in and of
Mhm.
itself is very difficult, and it showcases adaptability. And then I love the fact that you said, regarding Lee, and I've had a brief conversation with Lee. He seemed like a really intelligent individual and knows what he's doing, and obviously has a very good reputation. And aligning yourself with people like that is, in my
Mhm.
opinion, a phenomenal decision, because again, it helps streamline the process, and obviously you have to align with that as well. You have to
Mhm.
showcase that level of integrity as well, so that you don't affect their name and everything else. But aligning
Mhm.
yourself with those individuals is, again, a great life lesson to aspire to.
Completely. I mean, we're in a relationship business.
Mm-hmm.
If you stay in a closet of an office, you're not going to be a commercial broker for very long. And so you've got to have a broker that is a person of integrity. B, you've got to be assertive and be a person of integrity. As soon as you start lying or fudging numbers or whatever, it's going to get out quickly. We've all heard those stories of brokers who promise people different things and they couldn't deliver, and they're not in the business today. I mean, since I started, I know several people who started out about the same time I did that are not in the business now for a multitude of reasons, but one of those is just dishonesty.
Yeah, and
I agree.
our communities are pretty small. Word travels very fast. So
Right.
if you do something wrong, within a few weeks or months, the 6 degrees of separation, in my opinion, in
Mm-hmm.
Louisville, and I'm sure in Shelbyville, it's probably even closer. You're probably two
Yeah.
degrees or 3 degrees separated from anyone in town.
Mm-hmm.
So, really being on your P's and Q's is really important. So,
I kind of wanted to dive in because I'm curious on your very first commercial investment, or it
Mm-hmm.
could be a favorite of yours. I'd like to just kind of dive in a little bit, and if you can tell us like how you got involved in it and
Mm-hmm.
just a little bit about it, that would be great.
The first one was a medical building, but really the one that I think could be applicable to a lot of people across the board was I'm good friends with some guys that own multifamily in Louisville. They own a business called Launch International, so they really cater to refugees, and they had a home that was in the south end of Louisville that was basically a triplex. We bought it from them because they were scaling, so they were buying apartment communities instead of just homes and kind of duplexes and triplexes at the time. And so we bought that, and nothing ever goes perfectly. So we decided that we were going to turn it into a duplex, and we had two tenants come in. One tenant had been there for about 2 months, and she recommended somebody from work. Long story short, the reason she referred that person is because she was hanging out with her husband a little too much, and so literally overnight we have complete vacancy, a broken front door, and two smashed windows, and everybody's gone. And then we were like, okay, not doing that anymore. So then we turned it into single family and just leased it to one family, and it was awesome. And there was a refugee guy that came in and wanted to buy it, and so we sold that single family. But before we did that, we had read about 1031 exchanges, and we had the broker that we were working with on the residential side kind of tell us different options that we could do if we sold the property.
Yeah.
So I had met an older gentleman, um, and this was actually a Shelbyville property, the first commercial we ever bought. my partner and I. So we sold that home and we 1031 into a single family close to where he lives, basically like where the new Menards is on the south end of Louisville, outside of Snyder. We bought a house there that was a fixer upper, and then we bought a daycare building in Shelby County out of that 1031. That was the first commercial property that we'd ever bought. And that guy that runs the daycare is an awesome tenant. They run a good operation there. And you know, another thing that I like about commercial is a service. So like when we walked into that daycare, we saw a few different things where we were like, man, this could be replaced, that could be repaired. And seeing like small chairs and stuff and small toilets and the different things that a daycare has, it kind of like tugs at your heart because you're like, man, people's kids are here. We need to manage this well. So like we replaced all the windows for them. They didn't even ask for any of that. We just did it because we wanted those kids to have a great experience. And like I said, they've never missed a payment. They've done a few things, like they put up a new chain link fence without even telling us. I drove by one day and was like, is that a new fence? So I called the owner and was like, hey, did you put up a new fence? I'm okay if you did. And he's like, oh yeah, I didn't want to bother you. You know, like y'all did this and this for us. And so I just went ahead and did it. I mean, you know, like it kind of makes you feel good. Like, oh, I served them so well that they're taking care of the property well. But that was a super easy way for us to get into commercial. There was already an existing tenant. There was an older gentleman that owned it. And just through kind of a coffee conversation, I mentioned that we were looking at investment, real estate, and all this kind of stuff. And he mentioned, well, I've got a daycare building that I would sell you. And it just happened. So, you know, A, relationships, B, opportunity, you know, take the opportunity.
Yeah, like you said, it is a relationship business, like you had said. I mean, it's amazing the things that just come up during conversations. I'm sure it happens in brokerage a lot too, where you're just kind of just having conversations and you just mention what you do, and then they're like, oh, like one of my friends is actually looking for, you know, a space, or oh, you know, we're actually near the end of our lease, and you know, we're thinking about looking at different options, and that's just all through having conversations and being, you know, of service to others.
Right. Yeah. And, you know, in Shelby County, it's kind of, especially when our firm started in 98, when we would tell people we only do commercial, they would be like, well, what about this house? Like, we only do commercial. What about auctioning a farm? We only do commercial, you know, like, and we're really like central Kentucky guys, you know, like we try to go beyond the transaction, serve our client, you know, whatever their need is what we want. So we're very relationship driven. And not really as much just transactional. So if we have leads for residential stuff, you know, like we refer that out. We have a lot of residential people that refer to us, just because we're very niche and we know that we're not going to be competing with each other. But yeah, all about the relationships and the community and just having good property that serves the community well. And that's what I really learned even before I was a broker with that daycare building.
So yeah, so one of the things I'm kind of curious about is, you know, we had kind of alluded to it earlier in the discussion. So obviously your development out in Saddlebrook, if I'm not mistaken. Saddlebred. I'm sorry. I don't want to misspeak. So I was actually, you know, I had a client that, you know, had inquired about his development. So he'd send me some plans and everything as well. So I got an understanding of how the phases are going to be working, but I'm kind of curious about if you could elaborate on what was the impetus to try to pursue that opportunity. And then from there, you know, maybe talk about some of the things you've learned over the course of, you know, the development, because as I've never been undertaking a development. Hopefully one day I will, but I do know several developers through, you know, just relationships that I've built with clients and such. And it is very difficult. It's much more difficult than people think it is. I mean, it's not
for sure,
because you're always going to run into something. And so if you could share that, I think that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, once again, a guy that I had met in Shelby County, we had done a few deals together, all over central Kentucky, really. He owned the land there. We call it the bypass in Shelbyville. Freedom's Way is technically what it's called, but all the locals say the bypass. And so at that time, it was 69 acres. It was zoned C4, which is highway commercial. So, you know, zoning's in place. There's literally a neighborhood on the other side of it that would link it to the bypass. There's just tons of growth on the west side of Shelbyville. And when I first started doing brokerage, I would always look at that property. And like I said, it wasn't on the 5-year plan, but we also helped plant a church in Shelbyville. And I would look at that property and I would think there's 1,000 houses coming. Most locals had no idea what was coming, but because we were in the business, we just learned. And I was like, Commission Church was the name of our church, needs to be up there. Like, there's going to be a bunch of people who are disengaged. It was in the middle of COVID, all the stuff. Well, actually, it was right before COVID when I started thinking about it. But then during COVID, I really got a burden for it. Like, we need to be up here serving people and figuring this out. And so I talked to him and brought on a partner who grew up in Shelby County. He doesn't live here now, but we're very like-minded. And so this one client of mine was like, well, I'll owner finance it for you. So then you've got very little money down. We basically gave him and his partner what they wanted for it, because I knew the value of the land, it being commercial and all the residential growth that was coming. So we secured it. And then the fund started getting all the approvals from the state and the city and doing long-eared bat studies on a bean field. So, talking to an environmental engineer and them saying, well, how many acres is wooded? It's like, maybe one.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how many bats live in these beans, but if I've got to pay for this study, I guess I got to pay for this study. And so, there's some uniqueness to it too. One of the big things that you learn is how important things like sewers are, right? So, when you're a teacher like I was, you don't realize like what a big deal having a sewer going through the middle of the property is. But this property had a sewer going right through the middle of it, all the way back to the high school. And then you start working with that. And then you have to figure out all the different companies and all the different approvals. And so it took us maybe 6 months to get through that. But, it would have been really, really tough if we didn't have a team. And if you're a developer, you have to have a team. I mean, there's just no question. You've got to find an engineering firm that's good, that you get along with. You've got to have the excavation company. You've got to have different contractors. You've got to get along with all the municipality stuff. One of the unique things is it's Shelbyville sewer, but not Shelbyville water. So we're dealing with West Shelby Water, which actually gets their water from Louisville. So it's really Louisville water in Shelbyville, but yet it's Shelbyville sewer. And then there's KU on 80%, Kentucky Utilities on 80% of it for the electric, but the other 20 is a different company. It's a co-op. So you've got multiple utility companies on the same tract of land. And then we were trying to acquire more property adjacent. So my partner bought a 5-acre tract that connected us on the backside down to US 60 Shelbyville Road, and then bought another 8.5 acres of frontage just last week to add to that. So once we actually started excavating on the road, we didn't know how. We knew there was about 100 feet of rock that we were going to have to drill through. So we get the hammer drill and all that kind of stuff and all the heavy equipment out there. But we didn't know how deep the rock was. Well, that delayed us a month because the rock was a lot deeper than we thought. But we finally got through the rock and we started getting all the stuff. And then you have weather because, we got delayed with permitting a few different times back in the summer. So we didn't start with the excavation until August. Then we hit the rock and then it started raining and then we got snow and all the stuff. So, we're probably 4 months behind where we really wanted to be. Other developers try to encourage me that, well, unless you're a year behind, you're not really behind. But it feels behind.
Yeah.
And but we've got a lot of progress. About a month ago, we put asphalt down on one section of the boulevard that we've built there. And then we sold several acres to Traditional Bank. So they're going to build a big branch there. And I was really happy to hear. I had no idea before the week of closing. It's going to be the biggest building that they own outside of their headquarters in Mount Sterling. So, and it's
Wow.
literally, it's basically the same size as their headquarters. So they're really planting a flag here. And the way that they're orienting the building, even though they're on the corner of Freedom's Way and the Point Boulevard, which is what we're naming that main road, they're facing the boulevard. So it gives the whole development more legitimacy, knowing that there's going to be this bank that's planting this flag here that's on the corner, but they're not facing Freedom's Way. They're facing the Point Boulevard. And then we have another road, that connects up to the subdivision that we're currently working on right now. As we speak, it ought to have gravel on it. And we've got a box culvert there that's going to have, let's see, it should be completed Friday. So we should have a road there in the next couple weeks, weather permitting. Well, I really jumped ahead into details first. I should tell you that my wife is behind the name of that development. So Shelbyville is called the Saddlebred Horse Capital of the World. So the saddlebred horse is different from thoroughbred. They don't race, but they're show horses, and they walk with a certain gait that's really smooth. And so they're really good for riding long distances. And so I was like, well, it fits Shelbyville because it's saddlebred. There's a kind of a hill or a point there. So Saddlebred Point. And then also I was like, well, we're in this for the long haul. So it's good to have a saddlebred horse.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's funny that, again, because I think there's a lot of people probably listening that they have aspirations to do some sort of development in the future. And, a lot of times you don't realize all the red tape you have to get through before you can even break ground. I mean,
Sure.
You've seen some developments even in town that, they've been through the process of getting permits and whatever other things they have to deal with. You had to deal with those bats. I know there's other, we've had similar situations in the past with some clients where they sold a parcel of land and it's like, oh, wait, this fruit bat just so happens to migrate through this corridor. And so now you have to have this study and, if there's any environmental concerns or anything like that, that's another layer of different things. So you could see a piece of land sit there for a year before anything actually happens. And there's still moving parts in the background. And so I think it's really nice to be able to hear you talk a little bit about, some of the things you had to do even before you broke ground. And then as you broke ground, obviously, depending on where you're at around the country, there's different terrain. There may be different, rock formations underneath that you have to contend with, which it seems like you had to deal with. So, there's a lot of moving parts for sure.
Oh, yeah. Wetlands is increasingly more important for people to get approvals on.
Yeah.
When you hit a certain scale, you're going to run into federal regulations, which actually in Shelbyville, we go by federal. Not all municipalities do. So Shelbyville is pretty strict in that regard, in Shelby County in general. But we've got a really good planning and zoning director. His name's Ryan Lipke. He's phenomenal to work with. He really knows his stuff. So that's helped a lot. And the mayor, he kind of rotated off December and retired. The new mayor looks like he'll be a good one too. But the former mayor was very business friendly, very supportive. He was a big cheerleader. And you've got to have the locals in place. When we made the announcement for the development back in May, one of the things that I really wanted to do is have all the utility project managers there. And I didn't just want them there to hear the pitch on what we were doing. But the first people that I honored were the police, because they were out on the bypass directing traffic. We had, I think, 200 people out there for the announcement. So I thank them. I thank Melvin at West Shelby Water, who's, probably never going to be in Louisville business first, but he's out there putting these water lines in, coordinating all this stuff. I had Tom Doyle from Shelbyville Sewer. Okay. Who wants to have a sewer? Everybody raise their hand. Okay. Without Tom, it's not going to happen. So I went through all the different people who are actually going to make this work. And a lot of people don't do that. Obviously we had the mayor, we had the county judge, we had, the VIP from locals. But without these people and coordinating with these people, nothing's going to happen. And I've seen it time and time again. You know, if you're a broker for long enough, people are going to try to come in and just argue with all those guys and fight everything they say. But you just have to talk to them because they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for 20, 30, maybe even 40 years. And there's a reason they're telling you what they're telling you. So just be humble, listen, ask questions, try to figure it out. But they're not your enemy. And I think that's one thing that I've seen a lot of people do is they just automatically come in and say, these utility companies are, you know, monopolies and they're just taking advantage of me. And well, you know, I guess there's a chance of that. But in my experience, they do things for a
I
reason.
know earlier you briefly touched on it with planning and zoning director and all that. And I know we've had off recording discussions about the vision of Shelby County. I kind of want you to elaborate because I want people to hear this about how much has changed here lately and like where you see the actual marketing trend going for Shelby County. Because it's in a lot of cities, I believe, if they followed what Shelby County's doing, they would have a lot of success. So
Yeah.
if you can kind of highlight that, I think that would be great.
Well, from 2010 to 2019, Shelby County was the second fastest growing county in Kentucky. So it was twice the national average as far as growth. Since 2020, that's changed a little bit. We haven't stopped our growth rate. It's just other counties are growing faster. Now our population actual number might be higher. You know, for example, the battery plant down in Glendale, you know, that's a smaller population. So, you know, percentage wise, we might not be beating them, but actual person wise, when it comes to Shelby County, there's a comprehensive plan. And that's important because, you know, some counties that aren't as urban, you know, they just kind of say, well, you know, go through a process if you want something to get rezoned or something like that. But Shelby County actually has a vision of what they want to happen. So how that's been able to be impactful is our infrastructure has kept up with the growth so far. So, you know, they were able to get new sewer plant. Well, that was huge because we've got millions of square feet of industrial coming, plus all the residential, plus commercial like we're doing.
Yep.
And so with that comprehensive plan, that shows you both current zoning and what a property could be zoned. You know, it's going to be one of the other reasons that we bought Saddlebred Point is we know that it's going to be harder and harder and harder to find commercial property, especially C4. C4 is the best you can get here in this county. You know, it allows drive-through, basically any kind of commercial use is C4. And so what they've been able to do, they're not anti-growth and they don't want to stop growth, but it's going to be managed well. You know, we've all been to the market where they just said, do whatever you want to do. And it just blew up. And then all of a sudden, well, people don't have the electric capacity. They don't have the sewer capacity. They don't have the water that they can connect into. And so, you know, without that due diligence, you've just wasted a lot of money and you're not going to be able to do anything. So Shelby County in general, I would describe it right now as in a transition. You know, when my wife grew up here, it was very much rural. You know, we've always had a good industrial base and a mix of jobs, but now you're starting to see a whole movement come in. You know, Oldham County, well, Jefferson first, you know, I mean, it's basically out of land. So if you want to build something from the ground up, and not tear something down, you're going to have to go somewhere else. Southern Indiana, you know, is seeing a big boom. Oldham County is already full of houses and pretty well developed. Bullitt County, you know, has a lot of warehouse distribution. There's only one way to go if you want to stay in Kentucky, and it's Shelby County. And, you know, we're within a day's drive of 2/3 of the national population. We're right in the Golden Triangle, which people call, you know, I-71, I-75, and I-64, right in the middle of that. So we've got rail lines, we've got all that you need to come. And so people are finally starting to come. Like I said, it took a lot of planning, but they've stuck to the comprehensive plan so far, and it's working out.
Yeah, I kind of want to piggyback off that. If someone's ever in Kentucky and you go to Shelby County, you could actually see that someone actually put some thought into what they're doing out there. It's not one of those cities, because I know if people are listening that you go to a city and they're like, why would they do this here? And then they threw some of this here and then it's over here and it's sporadic. Shelby County has definitely put in the work beforehand in the planning, and I can't stress that enough. Just building a community by planning thoroughly. It's amazing to come out there and say, oh wow, they really put some thought into this. So
Yeah,
it's pretty neat. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree. And like you said, it just creates a better environment for everyone because, for a residential property, you don't necessarily want to be located next to certain uses. And, in the commercial end, maybe it's better for you to be focused in certain parts of town. So, have putting some forethought into it, urban planning. I mean, there's literally, degrees that people study for that exact function. So it's great to hear that, Shelby County's been really taking that upon themselves to make sure that the future is bright through the planning side of things. So,
right. Yeah. And connectivity is huge in that. So for example, our property is on the northwest corner of the bypass and US 60. Well, there's all these subdivisions. There's other roads that go to MCM Academy, which is the middle and elementary school right beside Collins High School. But you can get to our property by either one of those roads or through the subdivisions. So it's all connected. And so, I joke, but I think sincerely in 5 years, you'll be able to do everything you need to do in that 1 square mile and never turn left. If you live in the new Fisher development behind Collins High School, you can drop your kids off, drive to the grocery, drive to a clinic, get something to eat for lunch, drive and pick the kids up and go home and never turn left. That's down to planning and connectivity. And holding to your guns.
It's definitely an amazing your development there by connecting all that. I wish people could see more of it in the highlight view and we could put it on our screen, but you guys have done a really good job of connecting the roads and then figuring out what to put in that. He's building a community within a community for the future residents and the current ones now, but it's pretty amazing. So
yeah, and once you guys get, I'm excited to see as the phases come live. Obviously you'll be sharing it, I'm sure, updates on social, and we'll make sure that our audience is keeping up to date on it as well. And maybe we'll have you back too when
definitely
one more
in a year or so.
Exactly.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I'd love to ask, first off, Jay, thanks again for your time. I know you're a very busy individual, and we're looking forward to seeing the progress you make on that development. But as far as the last few questions we like to ask at the end of our podcast what is the most impactful book you've ever read? I know we talked about a few offline. We're both avid readers. I know our audience are avid readers, so I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Yeah. So, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, as far as investing, I'm Christian, so I want to say the Bible's the best book ever. It teaches you about God. It also teaches you, there's 2 greatest commandments, right? Love God and love people. So what's the Bible about? If you want to learn how to love people, there's principles in there that can apply to anybody. I would also say, just on a broker level and a dad level, is Miracle Morning, because it gets you in a routine. And, if you're out of rhythm for any amount of time, like whether it's sickness and you're trying to bounce back or whatever, like, it's tough. But if you've got, a routine that you can incorporate into your morning that's beneficial, that gets you ready for the day, even before the kids wake up, you're going to be ready.
That's amazing. Yeah. Miracle Morning is one of my top books I always recommend to people. And for that exact reason, you get a head start on the day before anyone else. People aren't going to be bothering you at 4:30 in the morning, 5 in the morning, right? And you're going to have your time to make those small positive impacts. So, there's another book we talk about all the time. It's the compound effect. Is if you just do small actions every day, and maybe that's only in the morning. Maybe you have your hour and a half or 2 hours in the morning where you just do your routine. And then even if the rest of the day is just reactive because there's just so much stuff going on and you feel like you haven't accomplished what you want to, you still had those 2 hours in the morning and you're still making positive progress. So when you look back just 6 months, a year, 2 years later, the impact's going to be huge. So thanks for sharing. That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Jay, again, we really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I know I was excited to have you on. So one of the questions Yeah, absolutely. Is we have a CRE treasure chest, which is a repository of things such as PDFs, ebooks, analysis, it can be case studies that people do. And I know that you had an idea, which I'm excited to hear about actually contributing to the treasure chest. If you could let us know.
And it kind of piggybacks on the miracle morning, like when you've got so many hats that you've got to wear, having that routine that you go into every morning when you wake up, that's what I've found is the difference maker. I think that's one of the reasons that A, Lee, B, routine, why I've been so successful so quickly is because I had a great mentor and I had a good, healthy routine. And what I was going to share is what you do and why you do it in the morning before you get to start the day. I think that's the biggest thing that's helped me. And no matter what you're doing, whether you're a teacher, I used to get up at 4 a.m. to do lesson planning just to get it all done. And now I'm like, man, that was crazy. But I got it all done before the kids ever woke up.
Yeah.
And then that way, after school until the time we went to bed, I was with my kids, with my wife, focused in. And so I think if you can knock out those things in the morning, then you actually have your quality time later.
That's some phenomenal advice, really. And I know our audience is going to gain a lot of value from that discussion. So we're looking forward to seeing that contribution to the treasure chest. So if you guys, are able to do so, go access the treasure chest so you can gain access to that as well. So Jay, again, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. If people wanted to learn more about, your projects that you're working on, or maybe want to even get in contact with you if they're looking at property in the area, what's the best way to get in contact?
So there's a few outdated marketing things on altonwebb.com/saddlebred, or you can just go to Alton Webb with 2 B's, altonwebb.com, to find out more about us. Literally this morning I was reviewing updated drone imaging. And so I'm hoping to have more marketing stuff out by the end of next week on Saddlebred and some big announcements there. But really through our website, you can find my email, cell phone, everything through that. Obviously more than happy to help. And, I am a huge cheerleader for anybody who wants to get into commercial real estate, even if I don't do a direct deal with you. And Jeff, I know, has been to our lunch and learns that we do in Shelbyville. It's funny because we usually have banks sponsor them. And I've had bankers say, well, if so-and-so is going to sponsor it, is it okay if I come? And I'll reply, well, we're going to have 4 different commercial real estate brokerages there. So yeah, I think it's all right if you come. So we just want to see people thrive. And if they've got a vision, we want to try to figure out how we can help them reach that vision and not just compete or do whatever. And so we've had a lot of people do deals outside of us from those lunch and learns and different things. So, if somebody would like to connect on that end, I'd be more than happy.
That's amazing, man. Well, that's first off, thank you for that. Because I know there's a lot of people out there that don't necessarily do that. So, obviously the fact you're willing to do that is pretty awesome. So if you guys are wanting to, reach out or contact him, we'll include all the information in the description below. So if you guys are watching this on YouTube, go ahead and look at the description. If you guys are listening to this in a podcast format, whether that's Apple, Spotify, really anything, it'll be in the description as well. So again, Jay, thank you so much for your time. We greatly appreciate it. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, we would greatly appreciate it if you can like and subscribe. It really makes a difference in our impact to reach a broader audience. Along with that, if you guys listen to this in a podcast format, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. It does really make a big impact in our ability to reach a broader audience and simplify commercial real estate for the masses, which is our mission. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.